Hi, everybody. Welcome to more, the management of reality. We are going to talk about Donald Trump abandoning the Iranians. Why is he doing that? It's very strange. We need to explain it. So that's today's topic. All right, I'm going to share my screen with you. And the first thing I want to do is do a little epistemology with you all. In other words, get our bearings on how we decide that somebody has a good theory or somebody has a bad theory. In other words, how do we do this rigorously in science, right? What's the proper attitude when we're trying to decide between models of the universe? Okay, I want to talk a little bit about that, and then we're going to consider two different possibilities, and then think about which one is really screaming at us that it is really explaining the facts. Okay, so here we go. All right, I have to go to the beginning, forgive me. So what is a theoretical model? This is the first thing I want to talk about. A theoretical model, forgive me, my mouth is dry, is a system of articulated hypotheses. In other words, there's a bunch of things that you think are true about the world, and you stipulate them as true. And there is a functional relationship between all those different things that you think are true, so that together they make up a theory of the world. And that theory of the world, or of some piece of the world, is like a machine to make predictions. Okay, this machine, this theoretical machine, tells you, or it produces statements about what the future should look like. And the way we decide between different kinds of theoretical models is by the way we should decide, the scientific way to decide between models is when a model is successfully anticipating the future and another model is not, then you get rid of the model that doesn't anticipate the future and you use the one that does. And you only let go of it if another model comes along that anticipates the future even better, right? This is how you do this. You look at how well the model predicts. So let's professors, two different, academic scientists of geopolitics, people who study international relations, who think about strategy, about alliances, enmities, interests, the different kinds of assets, the different kinds of players on the geopolitical chessboard, control, and so forth, and are trying to build a model of how this works, right? In order to understand what's going on, and of course, to try and make predictions about what the various players on the geopolitical chessboard are likely to do or try to do, and what can they get away with, these kinds of things. So Bob is one of these guys. He's a professor. He's a student of geopolitics, and his model is that Trump is anti-jihad. Okay, so he thinks Trump is an enemy of political Islam. He wants to protect the West from Islam, doesn't like jihadism, and therefore he wants Israel to defeat the jihadis because he's pro-Israel to boot, right? So he wants Israel to defeat the jihadis. Well, this is good. This is a very clear model, right? It tells us exactly where Trump stands, and for the same reason, it's likely to make very clear predictions, right? Now we have Frank. Frank is a competitor. He's teaching at a different university, academic who studies geopolitics, and he comes up. His model says that Trump is pro-jihad, opposite of Bob's model. And he says that Trump is anti-Israel, which is once again exactly opposed to Bob's model. And therefore, he thinks that Trump wants the jihadis to destroy Israel. Okay? So his model could be represented thus. All right. So we want to know who's more likely to be right, right? This is what we do when we evaluate models. How do they do in terms of interpreting the universe? And the evidence from the past few days is very interesting because there were tremendous protests in Iran. The people of Iran have made it clear that they do not want the Ayatollahs ruling them. Okay, they have made it very clear in the last few days that they consider themselves to be oppressed by the fanatical jihadi regime that took over Iran in 1979 and has been ruling Iran for close to a half century. Okay, so the Iranians have made it very, very clear. They've been protesting in every Iranian city. The entire country is expressing the outrage it feels that they are still being ruled by the Ayatollahs. And in the middle of that, the Iranian regime starts shooting at people. So we don't know exactly how many, but the reports are that they're talking about thousands of casualties. Okay. And as this begins to happen, Trump says, we'll look at the headline. It says, violent crackdown in Iran as Trump warns regime will start shooting, quote unquote, if more protesters are killed. Okay, so Trump acquires this very macho kind of presentation and says, I'm going to protect the Iranian people if the Ayatollahs, and that makes perfect sense from the point of view of Bob's model, right? Remember, because Bob thinks that Trump is anti-jihad, and this entire display is, I'm going to put the Ayatollahs in their place. They better not mess with me. They better not mess with the Iranian people, right? So that looks like, yeah, it looks like Bob is explaining the universe. The universe seems to correspond to his model, right? And well, this is in Spanish, but Trump was basically saying that he was considering very, very strong options to deal with the Ayatollahs, and I believe there was even some movement of troops, an aircraft carrier or something. And then 2 days later, Trump says, well, no, we're not going to do anything after all because they told us that the executions stopped. That they're no longer going to be executing people. Trump claims was the headline in the Associated Press. Trump claims killing of Iran protesters has stopped, quote unquote, even as Tehran signals executions ahead. So even as Trump was making this apology for the Ayatollahs, vouching for them, which is what he did, he vouched for the Ayatollahs. That's what Trump did. The alleged enemy of the Ayatollahs vouched for the Ayatollahs. He told us that the killing of protesters had stopped. And even as he said that, because what he said in the interviews that, well, they told me that they're not going to be executing people and so forth. And even as he was saying that, which was unbelievably absurd, the Ayatollahs were announcing in public that yes, they were going ahead with the executions. You can't make this stuff up. Right? So it is impossible for Trump to go out more on a limb to save the Ayatollahs. I mean, this is the extreme of absurdity what we are witnessing. It is truly extreme. Trump vouching for the Ayatollahs, standing on the ridiculous argument that people from the other side, in other words, the Ayatollahs, told him that there are not going to be any more executions, as if the executions that already took place were not enough, as if 45 years of oppressing the nation of Iran were not enough, right? Oh no, so we're not going to do anything. They said it stopped, we have it on good authority. This is truly remarkable stuff. It is impossible to see anything more grammatically extreme than this. Risking people under, because this is so extreme that it makes it possible for me to make this video and make you see just what a contradiction this is to Bob's model. Because if Donald Trump were really the enemy of the jihadists, then it is impossible to give him a better excuse to act and remove the Ayatollahs from power, like he did with Nicolas Maduro in Venezuela. Really, a really great argument there. I mean, I don't like Maduro, but that doesn't mean that the argument that Donald Trump built to get rid of him was reasonable. It wasn't. And it violates international law, of course, right? So he had a terrible argument, but he wanted to get rid of him, so he went in and he did it. And in Iran, he has a fantastic argument. And those people are supposed to be his worst enemies. Look, the Iranian Ayatollahs, they have monthly or weekly rituals. I can't remember what the period is, but it's constant. They have these state organized rituals to shout death to America. These people are terrorists. They're funding different proxy terrorist forces around the world. It's not just in the Middle East, right? Of course, Hamas and Hezbollah are in the Middle East, but Hezbollah has tentacles all over the world. Hezbollah, right? And well, Donald Trump is supposed to be against that, right? Because he's supposed to be anti-jihad in Bob's model, right? So, my God, how can you give him a better opportunity to get rid of his alleged enemies, the Ayatollahs? He's got the human rights argument, which the left is not going to be able to argue with, because the Iranian people are in danger. What are the Iranians going to say? Forgive me. What are the woke left in the West going to say? You shouldn't go save the Iranians, the brown Muslims from oppression. Of course, the Western left was grammatically forced to support him. And what about the right? Well, the political right is anti-jihad, so they were all going to support him, to do the pro-Israel anti-jihad move. Of course, he would have had everybody with him. And how hard would it have been? We already saw in the 12-day war that Iran can't defend itself. The Israeli Air Force was acting with impunity all over the airspace of Iran. They had no way to defend themselves. They couldn't take down even one Israeli plane. So obviously this was going to be easy. These people are already on the brink. They've got everybody out in the streets. If you only take down, you can attack the buildings of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard. They're not going to be able to stop you. They have no air defenses. You just have to blow. And these are supposed to be your enemies. And he didn't do it. He plunged into the most unbelievable absurdity, which was to vouch for the Ayatollahs. Even as the Ayatollahs were announcing that they were going ahead with executions, just so that he could back down from taking them out. That's consistent with Frank's model, not with Bob's model. Frank's model says that Trump is pro-jihad and anti-Israel, and that he wants the jihadis to destroy Israel. If Trump really, 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 really wants that, then he might do something absurd, just to keep that plan on track. I mean, if his emotion is very, very, very strong, if it were really, really important for him that the jihadis will destroy Israel, if that was a project really dear to his heart, then he might risk absurdity for something so important, right? So it's not only consistent with Frank's model, it's consistent with a particular version of Frank's model, one where the mission of destroying Israel and using the jihadists to destroy Israel is one that they really, really care about. Okay. Well, it's not the first time we see something like this. I mean, because if it were just one time, you might want to find some way to argue to yourself that this was a fluke. That, you know, this, yes, it's an extreme behavior. It's very strange, but it's just once, you know, you might want to hang on to that. But the problem here is that the second time in very little time that Donald Trump does something like this with the exact same structure. In the 12-day war, Israel was probably within hours of taking down the Ayatollah regime because they had no air defenses. And Israel could bomb freely. Therefore, they could just keep doing that until those people fell. I mean, we already know that the Iranian population doesn't want them. We have overwhelming evidence of this, right? So if the Israelis had just continued, if Trump hadn't messed with what the Israelis were doing, then the Ayatollahs would have fallen. But what did Trump do? He saved the Ayatollahs. He came into the war and dropped a few bombs so that he could take narrative control of the 12-day war. And after he dropped his bombs, it's just one night of bombing. He said, that's it. We're done. It's over. And he imposed a ceasefire. Well, it should be obvious that if Tim is beating the crap out of John and you stop the fight, you're not protecting Tim, you're protecting John. You're protecting the guy. And that's exactly what Trump did. And in his theater, afterwards, he threatened, you know, very dramatically, he threatened the Ayatollahs that if they reply to his bombs, then he would just come in and utterly destroy them. It was an all caps threat on Truth Social. And what did the Iranians do? They replied with missiles against the U.S. positions in Iraq and in Qatar. They politely announced that they were coming so that buildings could be evacuated and so forth. But they replied. And Trump didn't keep his word. Even though he was attacked, he held his stance because it was the only way to stop the Israelis. Only if he kept calm could he stop the Israelis. And that was an absurd behavior. These are the international terrorists who oppress their own people, who have monthly rituals, state-sponsored rituals, where they chant death to America, death to the United States. They call the United States Great Satan. They kill innocent people all over the world. They're the greatest enemy of Israel, which is supposed to be the great ally of the United States, right? Or the United States, rather, is supposed to be Israel's great ally, right? So how can any excuse get better? They just fired missiles at you after you threatened them in all caps. And then you do nothing? when it is obvious that they can't defend themselves, when the Israelis were pummeling them, and you do nothing? I think that's diagnostic. Trump is protecting the Ayatollahs. If you want to read the whole analysis, you can do so at the Management of Reality. But I want to make clear that this is also not a fluke in the sense of Trump is a fluke. Okay? Because once you convince yourself that Trump is consistent and that this is really what he wants, the next thing you might want to hang on to is the idea that, well, okay, but this is Trump. Trump is a weird guy, right? I mean, he's different. He's changed politics forever. He's came out of, oh, wait a minute. He came out of reality TV, didn't he? And then maybe you feel a little chill going down your spine because so did Reagan. Well, not reality TV, okay, but he came from acting. Ronald Reagan also came from acting. And he's at the beginning of this US and Iran story. You see, because it was when Ronald Reagan was running for president that Ayatollah Khomeini took power in Iran. That's when the jihadi revolution in Iran happened, right during the presidential campaign. And Ronald Reagan was very macho, just like Trump. And he threatened Iran throughout the campaign. And he accused Jimmy Carter. That's Ronald Reagan. He was a great actor. And then he became a politician. And in the campaign, he accused Jimmy Carter of being a coward, basically. He wouldn't stand up to Iran. And he promised to U.S. citizens that he would stand up to Iran, that he wouldn't let Iran humiliate the United States. That was a big, very big part of the campaign. It was very dramatic because the embarrassment to the Carter administration was gigantic. The entire embassy of the United States in Tehran was taken hostage by the followers of Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini. So it was a very, very big blow to Jimmy Carter's re-election chances. And Ronald Reagan used this as one of the main planks in his attack on Jimmy Carter, right? And so his entire persona became, I'm the guy who's going to put Iran in its place. I'm going to show the Ayatollah Khomeini who's who, right? And it's quite amazing, but the minute that Ronald Reagan became president, he started sending billions of dollars in weapons every year to the Ayatollah Khomeini in Iran. And this is called the Iran-Contra scandal. And you can go read about this on Management of Reality. It's an amazing story. The president of the United States was sending billions of dollars in US weapons in secret to the guy who was supposed to be the greatest terrorist enemy of the United States. This actually happened. And nobody knows about this now. You ask people, I ask young people about Iran-Contra, nobody knows about this. It's been erased from the consciousness of pretty much everybody. This is a photo of Eagle Claw. It's the Delta Force operation that Jimmy Carter authorized to go rescue Rambo-like the embassies, the hostages in the embassy. And that's Ayatollah Khomeini. I mean, Hollywood couldn't have done it better, right? I mean, it's just the personification of evil, right? He looks the part. So when they caught Reagan doing this, the year that they caught Ronald Reagan doing this was 1986, okay? This had been going on from the minute, but for a while nobody knew. And in 1986, an Arab newspaper noticed that this was going on, and they wrote a story about this, and then the whole thing blew up, and it became an international scandal, and people were wondering, you know, what's going to happen. is Ronald Reagan going to be impeached? You know, and here and there, somebody even worried about the charge of treason, you know, because, I mean, what if this is not treason? What is? It's the commander in chief, the president of the United States, sending billions of dollars to the worst enemy of the United States, to a terrorist, right? So people worried, right? It was a tremendously fragile moment. If you lived through it, I'm sure you remember it, but you know, young people these days don't know anything about this. It was a tremendous thing. And when Ronald Reagan came out to explain, what he said was, look, sorry, we did wrong, but our heart was in the right place. We were trying to save the lives of a few US citizens who had been taken hostage in Lebanon by Hezbollah. So because Hezbollah is a creation of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard, we sent billions of dollars to the Ayatollah Khomeini so that we could beg for his influence on Hezbollah to release 5 hostages in Lebanon. That was his official story. And it is perfectly ridiculous. And it's the same structure we have with Trump. It is so important to strengthen the jihadi ayatollahs, so important that they will even court absurdity, they will court ridicule if it's necessary to get it done. And what that suggests is that they really, really care to get this done. Now, let me tell you something. There's no way you can believe the story about the hostages. They weren't freeing any hostages in Lebanon. And this is known for a fact because, oh, this is my slide, what the logic of this thing was, right? So we send weapons to Tehran in order to get the hostages out. But this is what they found. In 1991, this is years after the scandal broke, Seymour Hersh published an article in the New York Times front page summarizing what several different investigations had found. The most important investigation was by the Danish Seamen's Union, if I remember this correctly. And but it was several investigations that had demonstrated that the arms shipments to the U.S. secret weapon sales to Iran had begun in 1981. And that was very important because in 1981, there were no hostages in Lebanon. Okay, this is the chronology. In 1979, Ayatollah Khomeini comes to power in Iran. In 1982, oh, and I told you about the hostages in the embassy in Tehran when Khomeini took power, right? It's important not to confuse the two sets of hostages. These are two different sets of hostages. So the embassy hostages in Tehran, those were released when the US government paid $8 billion to the Ayatollah Khomeini. Okay, that's what happened. They paid $8 billion to the Ayatollah Khomeini for the hostages in the embassy. And the Ayatollah Khomeini used those $8 billion then to buy the weapons that Ronald Reagan was secretly sending him. Okay, that's how they worked it out. Now, look at the chronology. In 1979, Khomeini comes to power. The first hostage taken by Hezbollah in Lebanon was 1982. Okay. The Iran-Contra scandal broke in 1986. That's when people found out. But the weapons shipments, those began in 1981, right after Ronald Reagan was inaugurated president. So what this means is that the decision to begin sending weapons to Iran couldn't possibly have anything to do with hostages. They wanted Iran to have those weapons for some other reason. Okay. And Seymour Hersh, who's supposed to be this great journalist, he made the observation. He did. I do have to give him credit on this. He made the observation that the fact that the shipments began in 1981 meant that the hostage explanation had to be false. He did make that observation. But then he threw his hands up in the air and he said, well, then there's just no American rationale for sending weapons to Iran. And he left it at that. In other words, well, the hostage story is wrong. And well, we just don't know why they did it. And I guess we don't care because they never took it up again. There was no effort to establish why Ronald Reagan, the president of the United States, the commander-in-chief of the US Armed Forces, had behaved like the mole in the White House of an international jihadi terrorist, Ayatollah Khomeini. What explains that behavior? We still don't know, right? We still don't know. But what if we adopt Frank's model? Frank's model says that Trump is pro-jihad and anti-Israel. What if we extend that model to make it the model of the US bosses, not the model of Donald Trump, the model of the deep state that runs the United States? Well, then it makes perfect sense that you should see consistency. And you do. So I just want to point out that Frank's model, which is my own, has been put to the test many, many times. And it has been making very good predictions. Whereas Bob's model has been failing left and right. When I put together this model a long time ago, there was this flurry of interest in the press on the question of whether the US might attack Iran. And this happens periodically, right? There are these bursts of interest and speculation and warnings and hand-wringing and so forth every several months or so. And everybody starts saying that the US is about to attack Iran. We just had one of these. Just happened with the protests. But this has been going on for almost half a century. Think about that. That's a lot of years. It's a lot of years to see a process where every so many months there is an explosion of speculation about the imminent US attack on Iran, and then nothing. And then again, and then nothing. And then again, and then nothing for almost 50 years. That is remarkable. Remarkable. So when I noticed the pattern and when I put together my own model a long time ago, I thought to myself, well, I have to do what a responsible scientist does, which is to risk a prediction. And so when the recurrent explosion of speculation on the impending US attack of Iran came back, the next time the wave hit us, I said, well, I'm gonna make my prediction. And I published the article that's on the screen. And I said, no, I don't think the US is going to attack Iran. I don't think they're going to do it now. I don't think they ever will. You can read that article. We're going to put it in the description. And I said something else. I said there is only one condition under which the US would attack Iran. And that's the case where if the US attacks Iran, this is bad for Israel. Okay, that's the one condition in which the US might attack Iran. But otherwise, it's not going to happen. And I was right. The US did not attack Iran. They didn't do it then. They didn't ever do it until the 12th Day War. And the 12th Day War matches the condition I said precisely. Because what was happening in the 12-Day War was that Israel was beating the crap out of Iran. And if you stop that war when Israel is beating the crap out of Iran, when Israel is, in retrospect, obviously just a few hours from demolishing the Ayatollah regime, you stop that war, you're protecting the Ayatollahs. That's what you're doing. And that's what Donald Trump did, right? And that's what he did just now when he was given another opportunity to take out the Ayatollahs. A grammatically perfect and militarily optimal situation for him to move and take the Ayatollahs out and look like the savior of the entire West. That's what he gave up, to save the Ayatollahs, with the most ridiculous argument imaginable, that the Ayatollahs had told him that they were going to no longer kill so many people. I think Frank wins hands down. And it's not just Trump and it's not just Reagan. It's every president in between. Okay, because after Ronald Reagan comes Bush Sr. And Bush Sr. launched the 1991 Gulf War. Okay, Bush Sr., who had been a co-conspirator in Iran-Contra, and in my opinion, the guy truly running everything, because Bush Sr. had been director of the CIA, right? He was in that register. So anyway, Bush Sr. launched the 1991 Gulf War, and that war took out Iraq, not Iran. Iraq. Iraq was Iran's rival. And that policy to take out Iran's rival continued under Clinton. It's called the Clinton's containment policy. It was containing Iraq. You had two no-fly zones, one in the north, one in the south. Saddam Hussein couldn't move. He was pinned down. And then after 9/11 came the invasion of Iraq, right? As Bush Jr. And what did that do? Well, that installed a new government in Iraq, a Shia government controlled from Iran. Ever since the US invaded Iraq, Iraq has been the westernmost province of Iran, functionally. Nobody really says anything other. If you go read about this, you'll see it. It's almost mainstream to say that Iraq is the westernmost province of Iran. So there is a continuous thread of US policy. And in fact, the policy was expressed in so many words by Zalmay Khalilzad, who was in charge of the transition team for Bush Sr. on questions of foreign policy. And then he became a planner. He was undersecretary for planning at the Pentagon. And he published an article in which he said that it was important to contain Iraq and strengthen Iran. He said it in public, and that's what they did. That's what they did, right? So it's not Donald Trump, and it's not Donald Trump and Ronald Reagan. It's all of them. It's the U.S. bosses. This is what they're doing. Okay. So here's the prediction. No attack against Iran except under one condition. Attacking Iran is bad for Israel. If Trump had attacked Iran now, it would have been very good for Israel, because the Ayatollahs want to destroy Israel, and because then Israel would have had the opportunity to help solve the water problems of Iran. Iran has run out of water, and Israel is the country that can most help, right? And that would have been a tremendous propaganda victory for Israel it would have shattered the world narrative. And of course, that's what Donald Trump stopped. He stopped an event that would have shattered the world narrative against Israel and turned everything upside down. That's what he stopped. Because he's an ally of Israel? When it was a very easy thing to do? When the entire political spectrum would have supported him? When there was almost no military risk? When these are supposed to be his... Come on. Anyway, that's my defense of Frank's model. I think this is the way to this is the arena in any case. So you don't have to agree with me, of course, but this is how we have to talk about alternative, different kinds of models that we propose. All right, we have to subject every claim that we hear about geopolitics. We have to put it to the test. Is this claim explaining what is going on? Okay, there's a very important reason for this. Making claims is free. I am the best friend of Israel. I am Israel's #1 ally. We will support Israel. What did Clinton once said? I would die in a ditch for Israel, or something like that. Those things are very, very cheap to say. Just a little bit of spit. That's all you need, and you can say it. It won't cost you a thing. So it's obviously not very wise to build a model of the world on the basis of claims that are very cheap to make. Because if it's cheap to make, they might be lying to you. Right? I mean, the people who run the media, the people who run the countries, the people who run the largest corporations, do those people really grab the microphone to inform us or to manipulate us? What do you think? Well, if there's a chance that they're manipulating you, then you can't use the claims they make to build a model of the world. And of course, there is a chance, right? Because our interests clearly don't overlap perfectly with theirs. And that is the very definition of strategic conflict. And if there is strategic conflict, then you can't trust the signal unless it's a very costly signal. There's an entire theory about this. It's called costly signaling theory. In situations of strategic conflict, you can only trust those signals that are costly to emit. So if the government, if you want like a personal metaphor, it goes like this. If I tell you that I love you, but I plunge a knife in your back, which behavior is the one that is an honest signal of my true intent in relationship to you? Obviously the second, right? Because plunging a knife into your back is a risky behavior. You might defend yourself, and you might defend yourself so well that I might lose my life. So plunging a knife into your back, that's a very risky behavior. It's a costly behavior. Therefore, it's honest. You should trust that rather than my words, I love you, which cost me nothing. You see? That's how you know. You pay attention to the costly behaviors. People who run the US are always saying that they love Israel, that they defend Israel, that they're going to protect Israel, blah, blah, blah. But they've spent billions of dollars making Iran stronger. And they will pay the cost of being publicly ridiculous if that is the only way to save the Ayatollahs. And they will refuse to move even when all of the pieces on the chessboard are perfect, political, military, to support attacking them if they are really enemies, right? They will resist even that perfect situation. And we know that they don't need a perfect situation because they had a very poor excuse in Venezuela and they went in anyway. And we know from history then if there is no excuse, they'll make it up. So if they don't go into Iran, don't believe a word they say as to the reason. Because now they're saying, oh, they didn't go in because the Saudis were upset and were afraid, and because Benjamin Netanyahu supposedly told Trump that he was afraid, and of the Iranian response. Right? I mean, do they think we're children? Didn't we just witness Israel beating the crap out of Iran without Iran being able to shoot one Israeli jet fighter? Didn't we just see that? No. What's going on here is that Donald Trump is protecting the Iranian Ayatollahs. That is the world you live in. The West is crumbling because the people who are running the West are not defending the West. They are allied with the forces that want to destroy the West. Do you know where the most important U.S. military base outside of the United States is? It's in Qatar. Qatar, the Muslim Brotherhood state, the state that is an international center for financial center for international jihadism. Qatar, the author of the October 7th massacre, because Qatar is the sugar daddy of Hamas. That's where the United States has its most important overseas military base. It's called CENTCOM, Central Command. And its area of responsibility is North Africa, the Middle East, and Central Asia. This is a tremendously big deal. It's not in Israel, the ally. It's in Qatar. And when Israel tried to attack a few Hamas leaders who were being sheltered in Qatar, Donald Trump's response was to throw a tremendous tantrum to make Benjamin Netanyahu apologize to the author of the October 7th massacre, the Emir of Qatar, the Al Thani Emir of Qatar. And then Donald Trump declared that he was extending NATO-level protection to Qatar, which translates in diplomatic language to Israel, you little dog, don't you dare move again. If you ever touch my little baby Qatar, I'm going to smack you out of existence. That's what it means. That's what Donald Trump said. And he announced, or Pete Hegseth announced, Secretary of War now, that he's going to be training the Qatari Air Force in a U.S. Air Force base in Idaho. I mean, do we really need it spelled out? I think it's very clear. The difficulty is not in matching a model to the evidence. The difficulty is that we have grown accustomed to processing reality as if it were being reflected to us in the media. But that's not reality. That's the manufactured, phony reality of the bosses. That's the reality they make us live in. It's the reality that they manage for us. And we cannot defend the West if we cooperate with a mirage created by the people who are trying to destroy it. So I hope this is enough to wake us up, at least some of us. And if it does that trick, then share it, because we need our fellow Westerners to wake up in a big hurry. Our time is running out. I know I say this very often, but Gotta keep saying it. The West is in a big emergency, and we need other Westerners to understand the structure of what is happening. This is not alarmist.
Francisco,
Yes.
I sorry, I came here because there was a very good conversation in the chat, in the audience, with two people, and they were talking that one is like very skeptical, a little bit with your model, and the other one is defending you. So what they're saying is the
Okay.
following. Um, One is saying that um, um, sorry, one is saying that before it was worst with the Shah, and that in the Middle East they cannot impose a democracy because they follow the strong leader and authoritarian, right? And now, and the other says that that no, he was not the best, but it was not like now the Ayatollahs, etc.,
Okay,
etc.
look. I can see where this is going.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's fine. No, no,
yeah,
that's not a controversy I'm going to resolve here because it would get too complicated. But there's an easier way for all of us to participate in this. Look, there's way more evidence to consider than just what I discussed right now, and I am putting it up on the website. So go read the articles and see, because what's going to convince you is whether the model is a structure that allows you to understand more and more and more. So if more and more aspects of the universe that seemed previously paradoxical to you, or contradictory, or somehow absurd or inexplicable, if those get resolved, and they all get resolved by the same model, then your confidence that the model is working will grow. And we shouldn't have a huge fight over any one piece of evidence, because that I mean, if we are nitpicky enough, we can do that forever. We can argue one piece of evidence forever. We can see it different ways, blah blah blah. We can come up with ad hoc assumptions or speculations that would save one argument versus another, blah blah blah. And this can go on forever. So the game that I think is more fruitful is to start looking at more and more and more evidence and seeing, well, maybe no one piece of evidence is decisive, but how many pieces of evidence can I easily explain with Frank's model that are all very difficult to explain with Bob's model, right? If you start noticing a pattern like that, then you know you're on the right track. Then you know you're on the right track. And what we're doing on the website is we are examining many different parts of our history, because what we need to reconstruct, if I am right that our reality has been managed by the bosses who wish to destroy the West, then there's going to be many problems with the model of history that you have in your head, because they've built that model so that you can't defend yourself, right? So we need to be looking at different moments in history and tying together the structures that have been moving our social world in different directions. I'm sorry, I'm going to leave it there because I have to go. But we are, I mean, this is an ongoing process. I hope that you guys will comment on the Substack. Of course, to do that, you have to pay me, but I think that's only fair. And the more we discuss this and compare evidence and make theory together, the better the model will become. And the more you convince yourself that this is really going somewhere, then please take it seriously that we have a moral responsibility to explain it to more and more people. Take that seriously, because we cannot fight an enemy that we can't see. We cannot counter a strategy that we don't understand. So the first step is to understand the reality we are in, instead of the managed reality they keep making us live inside of. All right, guys. Thank you for joining me. I'll see you in the next live. We will now be having one every Thursday. I promise not to skip.